They searched the palace. The alien queen's daughters were resting safely in the humans' room. The doors burst open before anyone gave an order. 6 royal guards stormed into the east corridor of the Velthari Palace, their ceremonial armor clanking against the obsidian floor, their bioluminescent eyes scanning every shadow. Commander Drethful led the charge, his 4-fingered hand gripping his energy lance so hard the metal groaned. Behind him, 24 more guards poured in from the northern entrance. The palace alarms had been screaming for 11 minutes. The royal daughters were missing. Corporal Nathan Cole had been eating a sandwich. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor outside his assigned quarters. A cold piece of flatbread folded around something that was allegedly cheese, when the stampede of 8-foot alien soldiers came thundering around the corner. He pressed himself against the wall. They didn't even look at him. They kept running. Nathan stood up slowly, brushed crumbs off his uniform, and looked down the corridor they had come from. Then he looked at the door behind him. He had a problem. He had a very specific, very delicate problem that he had been hoping to manage quietly before the end of his shift. The problem was sleeping. 2 of them, in fact. Both of them were curled up on his floor, using his folded field jacket as a shared pillow. And neither of them had any business being there, and Nathan had absolutely no good explanation for how it had happened. He knocked softly on his own door. Nothing. He opened it a crack and looked inside. Both royal daughters of the Velthari Empire were still asleep. Princess Vane was 7 years old by human estimation, though the Velthari aged differently. She had wandered into his quarters 4 hours ago claiming she had heard music. Nathan had been playing a harmonica badly, because he was homesick, and it was the only thing he had brought from Ohio. She had sat down on the floor and refused to leave until he played the entire song again. Then she had fallen asleep mid-note. Her older sister, Troth, who was approximately 11, had come looking for Vane an hour later. She had found her sister asleep and had sat down to wait. Then she too had fallen asleep, because apparently the Velthari royal line had the collective willpower of a house cat in a warm room. Nathan had spent the last 3 hours sitting in the corner of his own room, absolutely unable to move, because every time he shifted his weight, the floor creaked, and Vane would stir, and he did not want to be the human soldier who woke up the alien queen's children in the middle of the night, in a foreign palace on an alien world with 0 diplomatic backup. He had missed dinner. He had missed his check-in call. He had missed approximately 4 mandatory briefings. And now the palace was in full lockdown, because the royal daughters were missing, and they were missing inside his room, and Nathan Cole was standing in a corridor, holding half a sandwich. He stepped back inside, closed the door behind him as quietly as a man defusing a bomb, and sat back down in his corner. He would wait. He would figure this out. He had survived a lot worse than a diplomatic incident on the strength of patience and complete stillness. The alarms kept screaming. Sereth opened one eye. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Her voice was calm the way a mountain is calm. "No," Nathan said. She looked at the ceiling, where the emergency lights were pulsing red. "There are alarms." "Yes. Are they about us?" Nathan considered lying. He was not very good at lying to children, alien or otherwise. "Probably." Sereth sat up, looked at her sleeping sister, and then looked at Nathan with an expression that he had come to recognize as the Velthari version of profound disappointment. She had the same expression her mother, the queen, used. It was terrifying at any scale. "You should have woken us," she said. "You looked comfortable." She stared at him for 3 full seconds. Outside, boots thundered past the door again. "You are a very strange human," she said. "I get that a lot," said Nathan. Vane was still asleep. She had not moved once in 4 hours. She slept with the absolute commitment of someone who had decided that consciousness was optional. Nathan looked at the door. The lock was a Velthari magnetic seal, which he had figured out how to engage from the inside on his 2nd day at the palace, out of basic security habit. It had been engaged since Vane arrived. Nobody had tried the door yet. That would not last. He could hear Commander Drethaval's voice somewhere down the corridor, high and clipped, issuing search orders. The Velthari searched fast and they searched in patterns. Nathan had watched them run security drills. They were methodical, rotating outward from the Queen's chamber in concentric rings. His room was in the 3rd ring. They would reach it in approximately 6 minutes. He looked at Sereth. "Does your mother know you wander at night?" "No." "Does she know your sister does?" "No." "Is that a regular thing?" Sereth tilted her head. "Vane follows sounds. She has done it since she was small. The palace medics say it is a sensitivity condition. It is not dangerous." "It is a little dangerous tonight," said Nathan. That is because you did not wake us, Sareth said again. She was not cruel about it. She was simply precise. Nathan accepted that. It was fair. He stood up carefully, stepped over Vane's legs, and pressed his ear against the door. Boots, voices. The specific high-frequency pulse of Velthari scanning equipment coming online. They were doing a deep scan of the wing. He had about 4 minutes. Okay, he said quietly, turning back to Sarath. Here is the situation. In about 4 minutes, palace guards are going to open that door. When they do, I need you to be awake, calm, and already standing. Can you wake your sister without screaming? Sarath looked at him like the question was insulting. She reached over and placed 2 fingers against the back of Vane's neck, pressing gently. Vane sat bolt upright, eyes wide, completely silent. Nathan was genuinely impressed. Vane looked at her sister, then at Nathan, then at the pulsing red light, then at the half sandwich on the floor, then back at Nathan. Did you eat in here? She asked. Yes. Mother says eating alone in small rooms causes melancholy. Your mother is probably right, said Nathan. He moved to the center of the room and stood in a way that put himself between the door and the 2 girls. Not dramatically. Not with his hand on anything. And the way a person stands when they have decided that something matters. The magnetic seal on his door disengaged from the outside. Commander Drethval filled the doorway. Behind him, 4 guards with their energy lances raised. The blue glow of the weapons lit the room in cold light. Drethval's 4 eyes adjusted, scanning from corner to corner, and then locked onto the 2 small figures standing calmly near the back wall. The commander made a sound Nathan had never heard a Velthari make before. It was somewhere between a gasp and a bark, and contained more relief than any sound Nathan had ever associated with a being that large. Nathan did not move. He stood where he was, hands visible, face neutral. Drethval stepped into the room. His scanning eyes moved from the princesses to Nathan, and then back, and then stayed on Nathan for a long time. Corporal, he said. Commander, said Nathan. Explain, Nathan explained. He kept it short and accurate. He said that Princess Kiss had followed the sound of his harmonica through an improperly sealed connecting vent, that he had not wanted to move her once she was asleep, that Sarath had arrived searching for her sister and had also fallen asleep, that he had sealed the door and remained in the room for the duration to ensure their safety, and that he had not triggered any alarm because he had made the judgment that an alarm would cause exactly the kind of panic that was currently happening, and had planned to report at shift change. Drethval listened to all of this without expression. Then he looked at Sarath. Is this accurate? He asked. Sarath looked at Nathan, then at the commander. Yes, she said. He played the harmonica. It was a good sound. Vane nodded vigorously. Drethval was quiet for a long time. Outside in the corridor, Nathan could hear the rest of the search teams arriving, the boots stopping, the voices going quiet as the news traveled down the line. They had been found. They were safe. They were in the humans' room. The commander looked at Nathan one more time. His 4 eyes were unreadable. You will report to the Queen at dawn, he said. Yes, sir, said Nathan. Drethval turned to the girls. He spoke to them in Velthari, low and rapid, something that was clearly both relief and fury braided together. Sarath answered him calmly. Vane tugged on the commander's armor and said something that made 3 of the guards behind him visibly struggle to maintain composure. Nathan did not speak Velthari well enough to catch it. He made a mental note to ask Sarath later what her sister had said. They left. Both girls walked out with Drethval, Vane pausing at the door to look back at Nathan, with an expression he could only describe as deeply satisfied, as though the entire night had gone exactly according to her plan. The door closed. Nathan sat down on the floor. He picked up the rest of his sandwich. He finished it. Then he sat in the quiet room, with the red lights still pulsing, and thought about the fact that he had to stand in front of an alien queen in approximately 5 hours, and that the best thing he had going for him was the honest account of 2 children who had decided that his harmonica was worth following through a vent at midnight. He had survived worse, probably. He lay back on the floor, stared at the ceiling, and did not sleep at all. Dawn on the Velthari homeworld was not like any dawn Nathan had seen in 19 months of deployment across 3 systems. The sky did not go orange or pink. It went a deep, bruised violet that slowly compressed itself into silver, and the 2 moons set in sequence like lights being turned off in a hallway. By the time the silver settled into full morning, Nathan had already been standing in the palace's outer chamber for 40 minutes. He had been offered a seat 3 times. He had declined each time. Standing felt more honest. The throne room of the Velthari Empire was not designed to make guests comfortable. It was designed to make them understand scale. The ceiling was 60 feet up. The floor was a single continuous piece of black stone that had been polished so perfectly, it reflected the room above it like standing water. The throne itself was carved from a material that looked like solidified smoke, dark and shifting in the light, and it sat on a raised platform at the far end of the room that required 11 steps to reach. Queen Vaelthar descended those 11 steps alone. She was taller than her daughters by nearly a full foot. Her 4 eyes were the same pale amber as Sereth's, and her movements had the specific quality of someone who had not hurried in decades. Not because she was slow, but because nothing in her world required speed from her. The world moved to accommodate her pace. She stopped 8 feet from Nathan. He stood at attention. He did not salute, because the Velthari did not recognize the human military salute, and he had been briefed that attempting it would read as aggression. He kept his hands open, and at his sides the standard greeting posture he had learned in week 1. The queen looked at him for a long time. Nathan looked back, not because he was brave, but because looking away felt wrong. "You are Corporal Nathan Cole," she said. Her spoken standard was perfect, accent-free, which meant she had studied it deliberately. That detail settled in Nathan's chest like a stone. "Yes, Your Grace. My daughters were in your quarters for 4 hours. Yes, Your Grace. My palace conducted a full emergency search for 2 hours. Yes, Your Grace. During that time you did not signal, did not alert, did not open your door. No, Your Grace." She tilted her head. "Explain your reasoning." Nathan had spent 5 hours preparing this answer. He gave it plainly. He said that the moment he recognized the potential for misunderstanding, he had made a calculation. Opening his door while the girls were asleep, with no warning and no context, would have presented guards with an image before it presented them with an explanation. In a state of high alert, images led to reactions before explanations could be heard. He had judged that the safest path for the princesses was to ensure that when they were found, they would be found awake, calm, and in his presence, so that their own account would be the first thing heard. He paused. "I may have been wrong," he added. "If Your Grace believes I was, I will accept that judgment." The queen was still for a long time. Then she said, "You were not wrong." Nathan said nothing. "You were calculating their safety, not your own," she continued. "A guard calculating their own safety would have opened the door the moment the alarm sounded and transferred responsibility immediately. You did not." "They were asleep," Nathan said. It came out quieter than he intended. Something in the queen's expression shifted. Not softened exactly, but changed. The way stone changes when light hits it from a different angle. "Sereth tells me you played music," she said. "Yes, Your Grace. A harmonica. From home. She says it was a good sound. I'm not a very good player. She says Vane followed it through the vent because she has never heard anything like it." The queen paused. "My younger daughter has followed sounds into dangerous places twice before. She has never followed one into a safe place." Nathan did not know what to do with that. He filed it somewhere quiet and kept his face still. "You are stationed here for another 4 months, the queen said. "Yes, Your Grace. The diplomatic agreement between your government and mine places a small human contingent in this palace as a gesture of mutual trust. You understand this?" "Yes." "Do you understand what it means that my daughters were safe in your room?" Nathan thought about it carefully. "I think it means the trust goes in more than one direction." The queen looked at him for another long moment. "Sereth asked me this morning if she could attend your shift reports," she said. "She says she wants to understand how human soldiers think. I have not given her an answer." Nathan said nothing, because he was not sure what the correct thing to say was, and silence was safer than the wrong words. "Vane asked if you would play the harmonica again," the queen added, and there was something in her voice now, some frequency below the formal register, that Nathan's ear caught even if he could not name it. He looked at the queen directly. "I'll play whenever she wants to listen," he said. "Both of them if they want." The queen held his gaze for 3 seconds. "You are dismissed, Corporal Cole," she said. "Return to your post." He turned and walked toward the exit. He had made it about halfway across the enormous reflective floor when the queen spoke again. "The connecting vent," she said. "Between the young princess's quarters and yours. I am told it was improperly sealed." Nathan stopped walking. "Yes, Your Grace. I am going to leave it that way." He stood still for a moment with his back to the throne. "Thank you, Your Grace," he said. He walked out into the silver morning. Behind him he heard nothing, no movement, no dismissal of guards, just the vast and perfect silence of a throne room that had just made a decision about something. His harmonica was in his left breast pocket. He pressed his hand against it through the fabric as he walked. He had a post to get back to. He had 4 months left on this assignment. He had a language to keep learning, and a diplomatic agreement to keep honoring, and a job to do that was, in the official documentation, described as symbolic. He was starting to think it was not symbolic at all. The palace corridors were bright in the morning light. Guards moved past him, and most of them ignored him the way they always had. But 2 of the guards he passed near the east corridor looked at him with something that had not been in their eyes before. Not hostility, not the careful blankness of professional neutrality. Recognition. Nathan kept walking. He turned the corner toward his quarters and nearly walked directly into Sarath, who was standing in the middle of the hallway, with her hands clasped behind her back, waiting with the patience of someone who had been certain he would come this way. "My mother spoke to you," she said. "She did. What did she say?" "That I am not wrong." Sarath considered this. "She says that to very few people." "I figured." "She also told Commander Drethval to reassign your ration allocation to the officer level," Sarath said. "You will receive better food." He was annoyed. Nathan blinked. "That was not necessary." "No," Sarath agreed, "but she did it anyway." They stood in the corridor for a moment. "You want to attend my shift reports," Nathan said. "Yes." "Why?" Sarath looked at him with those pale amber eyes. "Because last night you made several decisions very quickly, and all of them were correct. I want to understand how." Nathan thought about it. Then he said, "I'll think about how to explain it." "Good," she said. She turned and walked away with the same unhurried certainty as her mother. Nathan went back to his quarters. He sat on the floor. He took out his harmonica and looked at it for a moment. A battered thing from a music shop in Columbus that cost $12 and had made a 7-year-old alien princess crawl through a palace vent in the middle of the night. He put it to his lips and played the same song he had been playing when it all started. It was not a good performance. He was still a bad harmonica player and probably always would be. Down the corridor he heard small feet stop moving. He kept playing. The morning Sarath showed up to his first shift report, Nathan had prepared exactly nothing. He had thought about it for 2 days and concluded that preparing a lesson for a child who processed information at roughly twice his speed was probably not the right approach. Better to just let it happen and see where it went. She arrived 4 minutes before his report was due. Sat in the single chair in the corner of the operations room, like she had always had a chair there, and opened a small flat device that Nathan recognized as a Veltheri data recorder. His supervising officer, Lieutenant Donna Garrett, walked in 30 seconds later, stopped when she saw Sarath, looked at Nathan, looked at Sarath again and said, "Is this allowed?" "I have the Queen's clearance," Sarath said, without looking up from her device. Garrett looked at Nathan. Nathan shrugged. "She does." Garrett sat down and ran the shift report, which covered perimeter activity, communication logs with the human diplomatic vessel in orbit, inventory of medical supplies, and a flag on a piece of equipment that had been running a power drain for 3 days. It was routine. It was not interesting. It took 11 minutes. Sarath did not look bored. She did not ask questions during. She wrote something on her device at the power drain mention, and at 2 other points Nathan did not immediately identify. When Garrett finished and left, Sarath looked up. "The power drain," she said. "You noted it 3 days ago." "Yes, it is still unresolved." "It is. Why?" Nathan pulled up the maintenance log on his own pad. The technician flagged it as low priority, below threshold for immediate repair. "Thresholds can be wrong," Sarath said. Nathan set the pad down. "Yes, they can." "The drain is in the sector of the building adjacent to the guest quarters," she said. "If it continues, it could affect the climate regulation. Velther physiology requires stable temperature. If the climate regulation fails in that sector, my mother's guests would be uncomfortable. They are currently here to finalize a mineral treaty. Discomfort during negotiations affects outcomes." Nathan looked at her. "You got all of that from one line in an 11-minute report." "I was listening," she said. He sent a request to maintenance to escalate the power drain to high priority before the end of the day. This was how their arrangement worked. Sarath attended every shift report that her education schedule allowed, which was most of them. She did not participate publicly. She observed, recorded, and then, afterward, she asked questions that were never the questions Nathan expected. She never asked what things were. She always asked why things were done in a specific sequence, or what would happen if a variable changed, or whether the humans had considered a factor that Nathan had genuinely not considered. She was 11 years old, and she was the most rigorous thinker he had met on any world. 3 weeks in, Lieutenant Garrett stopped looking surprised when Sarath appeared. She started printing a third copy of the shift report without being asked. Vane's visits operated on a completely different logic. She did not attend reports. She appeared at random hours, usually following some sound she had detected. And she would simply materialize in Nathan's doorway, with the expression of someone who had arrived at a place they had always intended to go. She never stayed long. She asked odd questions, examined objects in his quarters with focused curiosity, and occasionally brought him things from other parts of the palace. Small objects, a smooth stone, a piece of woven material in a color he had no name for, a dried flower from the palace garden that she held out to him with both hands in a gesture he later learned was a Velthuri expression of gratitude that predated their written language. He kept everything she brought him. He arranged it on the small shelf above his bunk. It looked nothing like the shelf of a soldier, and everything like the shelf of a person who had been collecting pieces of a world he was beginning to understand. One afternoon, 6 weeks into the assignment, Sareth arrived for a shift report and found the shelf while Nathan was still logging in. She looked at it for a long time. "Vane brought you these," she said. "Most of them. The stone is from the Eastern Garden. She goes there when she is thinking about something she cannot say out loud." Nathan logged in and said nothing. "She does not bring things to many people," Sareth said. She was still looking at the shelf. "I know," Nathan said. He did not know how he knew. He just did. Sareth turned back to her chair and opened her device and said nothing further. The shift report ran. Nathan noted 2 more items than usual. Sareth wrote more than usual. Neither of them acknowledged the shelf again. That evening, after the report was done and Sareth had gone, Nathan sat on his bunk and looked at the shelf for a while. The dried flower from the garden was at one end. The smooth stone was next to it. There were 6 other items in between, accumulated over 6 weeks, each one brought by a child who followed sounds into the dark and had decided, for reasons Nathan could not fully parse, that his room was a place worth arriving at. He picked up the harmonica and played again. He was getting slightly better. Not good, not impressive, but slightly better. Down the hall, small feet moved and stopped. He played the whole song through without stopping. In the morning, there was a second stone on his shelf, darker than the first, with a vein of pale mineral running through it like a river on a map. He did not see Vane leave it. He did not ask how she got in. He put it next to the first one. Outside the palace, in the orbit above the planet, the diplomatic vessel sent a routine check-in. The treaty negotiations were progressing. The mineral agreement was 2 sessions away from finalization. Everything was proceeding as planned. The official record showed a standard deployment. Symbolic presence, goodwill gesture, nothing significant to report. Nathan submitted his shift log, noted the resolved power drain and 3 new items, and did not write down anything about shelf decorations or small feet in the corridor or the fact that a child who had never followed a sound to a safe place had now followed his harmonica 6 times. Some things did not need to be in the official record. Some things just needed to be true. The mineral treaty session, that was supposed to be a formality, collapsed on a Tuesday. Nathan heard about it through the walls. He was in the corridor outside the diplomatic wing when the Velthari delegation lead, a tall elder named Krathful, who had been managing planetary agreements for 40 years, walked out of the meeting room with his ceremonial sash gripped in one hand and his composure gripped in the other. 2 human diplomats followed him out, both talking at once. Neither was listening to the other. Nathan pressed himself against the wall and watched it happen. The issue, which he pieced together over the next 2 hours from fragments of conversation and Garrett's tight-lipped briefing, was a phrase in the treaty's resource clause. The human diplomatic team had used a term that, in standard translation, meant shared extraction rights. In the Velthari legal tradition, the same term had a secondary meaning that implied permanent jurisdictional transfer. Nobody had caught it in pre-review. Nobody had flagged it. The session had proceeded until Krathful's legal aide, a sharp young Velthari named Drev, had identified the discrepancy mid-reading and shut the whole thing down. The treaty was not dead, but it was sitting in a room with no one willing to open the door. Nathan went back to his quarters and sat with it. He had no diplomatic standing. He was a corporal. He was there to be a symbol. Nobody was going to ask him what to think about a treaty clause. Sareth knocked on his door at 1900 hours. She had not been scheduled to come. She entered without being invited, which she had started doing approximately 3 weeks ago, and which Nathan had decided to allow because the alternative was making her knock twice, and that felt disrespectful. She sat in her chair. She did not open her device. You heard, she said. Yes. What do you think? Nathan looked at the ceiling. I think both sides are right about what the word means, and neither side is wrong that the other side has a point. Which means the problem is not the word. The problem is that both sides are now looking at each other across a table, trying to figure out if the mistake was a mistake or a strategy. Sereth was quiet. It was a mistake, Nathan said. I know the diplomats of our team. Garrett has worked with them for 2 years. They're not strategic in that way. They are just very bad at reading secondary meanings in translated texts. Crathival does not know your team, Sereth said. No. He sees a word that claims less than it would give in our legal tradition, and he sees it placed in a clause that, if executed, would significantly benefit your government's resource access. Yes. So from where he sits, the mistake looks like a strategy. Yes. And from where your diplomats sit, the accusation of strategy looks like an excuse to extract better terms. Nathan looked at her. You're 11. Sarath tilted her head. You are saying that as though it changes the analysis. It did not change the analysis. He thought about it for another hour after she left. He was not a diplomat. He had no authority to intervene in treaty negotiations. He had no standing to request a meeting with Crathful or to speak on behalf of the human delegation. He did, however, have a shift report at 0600 that Crathful's personal aide, Drev, had attended twice as an observer at Sarath's indirect recommendation. And Drev had left both times with the same posture as Sarath, quiet, recording, listening for the thing underneath the thing. Nathan sent Drev a message through the internal palace system. Short. 3 sentences. He said he had no standing to address the treaty matter and was not attempting to. Said he had observed the human diplomatic team for 19 months and could speak to their working methods if that information would be useful to Crathful's assessment. He said he was available at any hour and would understand completely if no response came. He went to sleep. At 3 in the morning, his room signal chimed. Drev's response was 4 words, tomorrow. 7th hour. East Garden. Nathan lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling. The East Garden. The place Sereth had said Vane went when she was thinking about something she could not say out loud. He was there at 6:45. He did not want to be late for anything ever again. Drev was already there when he arrived, standing near the low stone wall at the garden's edge, his hands folded in the formal Velthari greeting posture. He was young by Velthari standards and carried himself with the kind of stillness that meant he was always paying attention. They stood in the early violet light, and Nathan talked for 40 minutes. He talked about the human diplomatic team's preparation process, their methodology, their habit of front-loading technical precision and back-loading cultural translation, and how that created gaps that nobody on the team recognized because they were all inside the same process. He talked about the specific diplomat who had written the clause, a man named Gregory Falk, who had been in diplomatic service for 18 years, and whose record was clean, and whose core professional instinct was always toward minimalism in legal language, because he had been burned by complexity early in his career. He talked about how a person who is trying to say less can accidentally say more. Drev listened to all of it. He asked 2 questions. Both were good ones. Then he said, "You are not defending your team." "No," said Nathan. "I'm explaining them. There is a difference." "Yes." Drev looked at him carefully. "Crathful will want to know why you came forward." Nathan thought about how to say it. Then he said, "Because the treaty matters. And because a mistake that looks like a strategy is still a mistake. And if nobody says that plainly, then 2 sides that both want the same outcome are going to walk away from each other because of a word." The garden was quiet in the early light. "The stone wall," Drev said, and gestured at the low wall Nathan was standing near. "Do you know what it marks?" "No." The Eastern Garden was built 400 years ago by the 3rd queen of the Velthari line. She built it as a place for her children to follow sounds. She believed that children who followed sounds were finding the things that adults had stopped hearing. Drev paused. She also negotiated the first lasting peace treaty between the Velthari and the Harith, our oldest rival. She did it by explaining her rivals to her own people rather than defending her people to her rivals. Nathan stood with that for a moment. "That is a coincidence," he said. "Possibly," said Drev. He inclined his head in the Velthari gesture that Nathan had learned meant acknowledgement of something received. Then he walked back toward the palace. Nathan stood in the garden for a while longer. The violet sky was compressing toward silver. Somewhere in the palace, in a room with a vent that had been deliberately left unsealed, a 7-year-old princess was probably still asleep, committing to unconsciousness with total dedication. He would be at his shift report in 2 hours. He would note the items on the log and Sareth would attend and write things down and ask the question underneath the question. He walked back inside. The treaty session resumed 48 hours later. The clause was revised. The word was replaced with 2 words that left no secondary meaning in either legal tradition. Gregory Falk, who did not know about the garden conversation, described it afterward as a routine correction. Krathfull's team accepted the revision without comment. The treaty was signed 6 days later. Nathan was not in the room when it happened. He was running his shift report. Sarath was in her chair with her device open. Garrett was reading from the log. When the report ended, Sarath closed her device and looked at Nathan. The treaty was signed, she said. I heard, said Nathan. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, you were in the East Garden with Drev. It was not a question. He had told her nothing. She had simply paid attention to the variables and arrived at the answer. I was, he said. She nodded once. My mother was in the East Garden the morning after you reported to her, Sarath said. She goes there when she has made a decision about something important. Nathan was quiet. She does not tell me why, Sarath said. I have been trying to understand it for a long time. She looked at the floor and then back at him. I think I understand it now. She picked up her device and left. Nathan sat in the empty operations room with the shift log open on his pad and the silence settling around him, the way silence does after something has been understood. Nathan Cole had 11 days left on his assignment when Queen Veilthar summoned him for the second and final time. He had known it was coming, not from any official notice, but from small signals he had learned to read over 4 months. Sarath had been quieter than usual at the last 3 shift reports. Vane had left 2 objects on his shelf in 1 week, which was unusual even by her standards. Drev had greeted him in the corridor with a nod that contained something more formal than a daily acknowledgement. The palace was preparing to close a chapter. Nathan could feel it in the architecture. He went to the throne room at the appointed hour. The queen descended her 11 steps the same way she always did, with the unhurried certainty of someone for whom time arranged itself conveniently. She stopped at the same distance as before. Corporal Cole, she said, Your Grace, your deployment ends in 11 days. Yes, Your Grace. She was quiet for a moment. In 4 months you have filed 216 shift reports, resolved 1 high-priority maintenance issue before it became a structural problem, contributed informally to the successful resolution of a diplomatic impasse that would have delayed the mineral treaty by an estimated 8 to 14 months, and provided an environment in which my younger daughter has, for the first time in her life, followed a sound to a safe place. 6 times. Nathan said nothing. You have done all of this as a corporal, she said, without rank, without authority, without formal mandate. I had a job to do, Nathan said. You did more than your job. The job expands, Nathan said. When you're paying attention, it expands. The queen looked at him with those pale amber eyes. I have spoken with your government, she said. I have requested a continuation of the human presence in this palace. The diplomatic attaché will submit a formal request. It will be approved. She paused. I have also requested that the continuation include you specifically. Nathan was very still. Your government finds the request unusual, she said. Specific personnel requests are not standard in diplomatic agreements. They asked for justification. What did you tell them? Nathan asked. I told them that my daughters were safe in your room, she said, and that this was sufficient justification. The throne room held its silence. Nathan had been prepared for a lot of possible conversations. He had prepared for a formal dismissal, a review of his conduct, a commendation with no practical impact. He had not prepared for this. I would need to request the extension myself, he said. I can't commit to it here. I know, said the queen. I am not asking you to commit. I am telling you what is possible. He thought about Ohio. He thought about the ship in orbit, and the crew he had served with, and the rotation home that had seemed, 3 months ago, like the only future he was interested in. He thought about the shelf above his bunk, which he had already started thinking about how to pack. He thought about a 7-year-old who followed sounds and had never once won to a safe place, until she heard a $12 harmonica through a vent in a foreign palace at midnight. I will submit the request, he said. The queen inclined her head the first time she had made any physical gesture of acknowledgement toward him. There is one other matter, she said. She moved for the first time away from her stopping point, walking slowly to the side. And Nathan realized there was a small table to his left that he had not noticed before, probably because every piece of furniture in this room was designed to disappear against the stone. On the table was a flat case. She lifted the case and held it out. He stepped forward and took it. He opened it. Inside, on a bed of dark material, was a harmonica. It was Velthuri made, which meant it was constructed from metals that did not exist on Earth, and it was longer than his and darker, and had 17 stops instead of 10. There was an inscription on the back plate in Velthur's script. He could read enough to make out 3 words. "The safe sound," he said. "Yes," said the Queen. He closed the case carefully. "Thank you, Your Grace." She returned to her position at the base of the steps. "You are dismissed, Corporal Cole." He walked back across the black stone floor. This time she did not call after him. There was nothing left to add. In the corridor outside the throne room, Sereth was waiting. She was standing with her hands clasped behind her back, exactly as she had been the first morning, patient and certain, and already knowing which way he would come out. "She gave you the harmonica," Sereth said. "She did. She commissioned it 4 weeks ago." She described the sound to the craft maker from what Vane told her. Nathan looked at the case in his hands. "You're going to stay," Sereth said. He looked at her. "I haven't decided yet." "Yes, you have," she said, with the flat precision of someone who had been reading variables for 4 months and was no longer uncertain about any of them. "You decided in the East Garden. You just needed someone to make it official." He could not argue with that. She turned to walk away. Then she stopped, which was unlike her, and turned back. "I have been thinking," she said, "about how you make decisions. I have been analyzing the structure. And you do not decide based on what is best for you," she said. "You decide based on what is true, and then you find out afterward whether it was best for you." She tilted her head. "Most people do it the other way." Nathan stood in the corridor with the harmonica case in his hands. "Does that work better?" he asked. "Your way?" "For small things, perhaps," she said. "For large things, I think your way produces better outcomes." She left. He stood there for a moment. Then he went back to his quarters, sat on his bunk, and looked at the shelf. The stones, the woven cloth, the dried flour, the 6 objects Vane had brought him over 4 months, his battered harmonica, the new case beside it now. He picked up his pad and pulled up the request form for assignment extension. He filled it out. He submitted it. Then he picked up the Velthari harmonica and opened the case and looked at it for a long time. 17 stops. He had no idea how to play it. The scale was probably different. The breath technique would be different. He would have to learn the whole thing from scratch. He put it to his lips and made a sound. It was not good. It was not recognizable as music. But down the corridor, small feet stopped moving. He played it again, still wrong, still learning. The feet did not move away. He kept playing. Outside the palace, the violet sky was shifting toward evening, the 2 moons beginning their sequence above the mountains. The diplomatic vessel in orbit logged a routine check-in. The mineral treaty was in effect. The human presence in the Velthari palace was pending formal renewal. In the official record, all of it was administrative, procedural, expected outcomes from a successful deployment. None of the official record mentioned that the reason any of it had worked was a man sitting on a bunk in a foreign palace on an alien world, playing an instrument he was still learning. In a room with an unsealed vent and a shelf full of stones, too stubborn to stop making sound until the sound became safe. Some things did not need to be in the official record. Some things just needed to be heard.